Hi, and welcome to the Hello Live podcast, brought to you by the Hello Foundation. I'm your podcast host, Kelly Bodden, and I'm a speech-language pathologist based in Portland, Oregon. You will receive 30 minutes of free CEUs for listening to this episode in its entirety. I'll give you instructions on how to document your participation at the end of the episode. I'll also tell you how to get in touch with any questions or comments you have for us. But for now, sit back and enjoy the show.
My name is Heidi Peters, and I'm a speech-language pathologist. And today I'm going to be talking about connecting assessment results to IEP goals. Are you doing it right? And the reason why I'm doing this is because I've been an SLP just shy of 10 years, and I have worked in 5 states and over 15 districts. So I've experienced a lot of different IEP programs and been exposed to a lot of different SLPs and the way they write their goals. So I often cover leaves and fill in gaps when districts aren't able to hire. So pretty much all of my IEPs have been written by another SLP. I walk into the building at the beginning of the year or in the middle of the year, whenever my position starts. And I have to say, most of them, the majority of them, thankfully, are written very nicely. But there are some patterns of errors in regards to the present levels and goals that I've seen. And we'll go over those patterns of errors in just a minute. What I want to do with this podcast is take a step back and begin with the evaluation and how you get to those goals. So what sorts of things do we need to consider? What are we looking for? What do I write in the IEP? And how do I know what to target? So I surveyed 30 SLPs from within the Hello Foundation and through a speech-language pathology Facebook page. And while 30 people is not a large population sample, it's nice to know what others are doing and that I'm not the only one facing these issues. I would love to have a huge sample to find out what people are doing across the nation, but I'll save that for another day. So I'll be sharing some of the survey results throughout the podcast. So listen for those. Just a little background on the people that completed the survey. Most of the SLPs work with elementary age students, followed by middle school, and then preschool and high school had similar numbers. 25 of 30 people have worked in the school setting for at least 5 years. So these are pretty experienced SLPs. And the language assessment most often used was the SELF. And I didn't clarify whether it was the SELF 4 or the new SELF 5, because I know people are in transition to using the newest one, and either way, it doesn't really matter when you're going from the evaluation to the goals and the process. So to jump back to those patterns of errors that I have seen, and also that people through the survey reported seeing on IEPs that you've inherited from another SLP, whether or not this is students that have moved from out of district or out of state, or even within district from another SLP. So one of the patterns of errors, one of the errors is writing too many goals or objectives. So getting an IEP that has too many goals or objectives to meet in 1 year. You look at there and you're going, whoa, did they write every single item missed from the SELF 4 in their goals? 80%, so 24 of the 30 people have reported seeing this. And then the second one is seeing goals that are obviously straight from items missed on the assessment or from subtests. So an example of this would be, John will repeat sentences of increasing length and complexity. And of course, we look at those goals and we say, what? How that's not functional. Why are we working on something like that? That's not functional. Repeating sentences is not a functional goal. So we'll get into what to do with that. But 60%, so 18 of the 30 people reported seeing goals like that. The third one is writing goals that are too general. Seeing goals that are really general, like John will improve his receptive and expressive language skills. And that's your goal. And so what happens with those kind of goals is the next SLP, usually me and my colleagues, we have to spend the time to then go and figure out what specific skills this child needs to work on. Because if you get a goal that says that this child will improve their receptive and expressive language skills, we say, okay, does that mean they need to work on some semantic, like word meanings? Do they need to work on vocabulary, categorization, similarities and differences? Do they need to work on their present progressive, or do they need to work on plurals or past tense? What do they need to work on? So 87%, 26 of 30 reported seeing goals like that. On the flip side of writing goals that are too general, there are goals that are too specific. They have like specific program names in there. So like the STAR program or Language for Learning, and there's many others. But here's my big thing. If you have to have training or specific materials to do it, then it shouldn't be written in the goal. So there shouldn't be program names or limiting of therapy techniques. So if you're working on, say, vocabulary, you could just say, that through a nicely written goal, that they're working on vocabulary. But you're not going to put in there while using the STAR program or while using Language for Learning. Because what if that next SLP doesn't have Language for Learning, or they're not STAR trained and they don't have the materials? So, we don't want to pass on those sorts of things. You can write that stuff in the present levels, like they have been using the STAR program and this is what we've been targeting. It's up to the next SLP to, decide what's best for that child. I do say there's an exception, something maybe that the child owns, like a Dynavox or an iPad with an AAC device or with an AAC app on it, that is going with the child. So 60%, so 18 of the 30 reported seeing goals that are too specific. So, you get the IEP and you go, oh, that's nice, but I don't have any of that. I don't have any of that stuff. I don't even have a budget to buy that stuff. So I'm going to have to, right now, that child's not going to meet that goal because I don't have that stuff. So some things to consider when you're writing goals. And we'll go back and review those again towards the end. So I will now go to, where do we start? So when you get a referral or even a 3-year reevaluation, start with the evaluation, of course. You can decide which evaluation or which assessment tool is best. So this can apply for standardized assessments or even informal assessments. You can use the SELF, the TOEL, the CASEL, the PLS. There's other things. And like I said, an informal evaluation, like maybe an IEP probe when it's time for their annual IEP. So review your results and, score it, do all that stuff. If this is a student that is also being assessed by the school psychologist or the resource teacher, what were their results? How are their memory scores? How did they do attention-wise? How did their oral expression skills come out? Talk to the school psychologist. And then the biggest thing is knowing what the subtests are measuring. So if I see goals like John will repeat sentences of increasing length and complexity, I go, whoa, okay, we need to look at that subtest and know what that subtest is measuring. Okay, we're looking at memory. We're looking at morphology, so word structures. Maybe that child did really poorly on that subtest because they don't use plurals, they don't use past tense. And of course, all of those things get scored as wrong. So that could be the reason why that child is actually performing poorly on that subtest. So review the manuals if needed. I just was reviewing the SELF 5 in preparation for this, and it gives really nice, a page for each subtest of why, what this is measuring, how this pertains to the classroom, potential targets. So it was really, great. And then, look at errors. Do you see patterns? Use the item analyses on each subtest. Not every subtest has them, but most of the subtests have them. Use that because you can go through and say you're doing the following direction subtest, and you start circling the items missed on the item analysis, and you go, okay, yes, they're missing concepts, but wow, it's really just spatial concepts that they're having a difficult time with. I mean, they've got the temporal concepts, they've got, and then when you go to write your goal, you're not going to just say, oh, they'll improve their use and understanding of concepts. You can narrow it down to spatial concepts. So really know what those subtests are measuring. Look for look for patterns of errors. If they're having difficulty with, say, word classes on the Self 5 or even Self 4 word classes, linguistic concepts, following directions, semantic relationships, sentence comprehension, that kind of screams vocabulary to me. Like, why is this student missing all of these test items? Okay, well, maybe it's just that they don't understand the vocabulary. If you don't understand the vocabulary, well, you're going to do really poorly on a lot of subtests. So really knowing what the subtests are measuring. And so another thing to consider is any other diagnoses that the child may have. Does this child have ADHD? Do they have a TBI, autism, Down syndrome? There's any diagnosis may have some things that may affect their testing results. If you've got a child with ADHD that you're testing and they do really poorly at the following directions and recalling sentences subtests, well, it could be that their attention skills are interfering with their ability to correctly do the subtests. So things to consider. And then while you're doing the evaluation, you should also do a language sample. And I know that a lot of places it's not required, and people often do, like the one-word expressive vocabulary test or something as an additional assessment. But really, a language sample is so much easier, and it tells you so much more. 5 minutes, and the big thing is, does it support your testing or not? And you may see other concerns. I just assessed a student a few weeks ago who did really bad on the formulated sentences subtest. And I thought, wow, this girl has a really hard time formulating sentences. I mean, she's like, when I talk to her, I don't notice that. So I did a language sample, and I was like, and I thought, wow, she's actually, she's formulating sentences quite nicely. Mind you, they're not really complex sentences, but her vocabulary was very basic. So it was the fact that she didn't understand the vocabulary used in the formulated sentences subtest. So her sentences didn't really make any sense. So of course she scored really badly on that subtest. You may notice on the word structure subtest of the Self 5, that's the one where you go through and you see if they know their plurals and their past tense and their auxiliary verbs and whatnot, that maybe they miss plurals on that subtest. And then you go do the language sample and you're like, oh, they're using plurals fine. Okay, I don't need to write a goal for that. They're actually using them. Maybe they just missed the 2 that are on the subtest. So just things to pay attention to. Do the evaluation, know what the subtests are measuring, look for patterns of errors, use item analysis, and do a language sample. And 87%, so 26 of the 30 people, said that they also obtained language samples in addition to standardized assessments. So the next step is to prioritize. So when you have all these errors that this child has on the assessment, you go, oh my gosh, where do I even begin? A big thing to consider is the hierarchy of language development. You're not going to start working on similarities and differences if this child does not have basic vocabulary, or if they don't even understand attributes. You have to know what attributes are and to talk about similarities and differences. So my suggestion would be work on attributes first. So 73% of the people that completed the survey, so 22 of the 30, considered this when choosing what to target. So you can look at semantic development, kind of what I was saying. You're going to start with vocabulary before you start with similarities and differences or synonyms and antonyms. Making sure that you start with those earlier developing skills and then move towards those later developing skills. Also consider the Brown stages of morphological development, naming things, putting actions in object or action plus location before you're going to get down to regular past tense verbs. So you can review those. You can Google that stuff. It's pretty easy to find. When I'm meeting with parents and school staff about this stuff, I try and paint a picture of a pyramid or of a house, and I explain to them, how important it is to have a really strong foundation, because if you don't have a strong foundation, the whole thing's going to crumble. So what ends up happening is sometimes these students have goals that are way above their level, and you kind of get this Swiss cheese effect where, like, oh, it's kind of hit and miss. Like sometimes they can do it, sometimes they can't, and you kind of get these holes in their language skills, and you're like, what's happening here? It's because they don't have that foundation down. That foundation has not been built. It does take time. That's why there's a developmental order to these things, because there's an order. You don't learn one before the other unless maybe it's been targeted specifically, and then you go, okay, well, they don't really understand the concept because they missed all these other concepts that actually are supposed to come before that. Again, if the foundation is weak and the child doesn't understand basic vocabulary or doesn't have basic sentence structures, they're not going to be able to learn and use language correctly. And then goals for those types of later developing schools are currently unrealistic. As this is, IEP goals are only for a year. So what is realistic for this year? So one thing to consider for prioritizing goals is the hierarchy of language development. Another thing is the teacher, parent, or student input. What is important? What is functional? So when you get to high school and you get an IEP goal that says that they're going to work on their is-are verbs, and you go, why is this important anymore? You've got an 11th or 12th grader that's trying to work on plurals. You go, well, they've had how many years to work on this, and they haven't made any progress. What do they need to know? Well, that child probably needs to know, if it's a self-contained, student, that child probably needs to know how to maybe make a basic meal like macaroni and cheese in the microwave, or how to do some laundry, how to follow a sequence, how to follow directions. So talking to the teacher, talking to the parents, even asking the student if they're old enough, what's important to you? What do you want to work on? And 90%, so 27 out of 30 people I surveyed consider this when choosing what to target. And that's really, really important. And I understand that we don't always have the time, because sometimes you do have a really big time crunch when you get a new evaluation. I just had several that moved in district, and I had like a week to do the evaluation and have the meeting. And, sometimes the teachers don't even know them. So, just if you have the time, that is such an important thing to consider. What's important to them. And sometimes they'll say something that's just not realistic, and that's your job to kind of go back and explain language development to them. So pick a few things to work on. This is, again, don't write a goal for everything that they missed on the assessment. Pick 2 or 3 goals or objectives, something that's realistic for that student. Kids that are coming from the general ed setting are probably going to make quicker progress than the kids in a self-contained setting. And 77% on the survey also said that they pick 2 to 3 goals to work on for the year. I also like to group similar types of goals. So I might group categories, functions, associations, and describing or attributes all into one goal, because I can work on those pretty easily all at the same time. I also might put pronouns plus auxiliary verbs, is-are verbs plus present progressive ing together. So he is running. She is jumping. They are. So I like to group those kinds of goals because they are easier to work on. They're actually almost easier for me to work on if I group them than if I separate them out. So the first thing was evaluation. The second thing is prioritizing. And then the next thing is to write it down. Write down your findings. Write it down in the evaluation. Write down their strengths, their weaknesses. You usually have a pretty in-depth report. At the end of the evaluation report, write your recommendations. So identify other areas of need and the hierarchy when they should be addressed. And you don't necessarily have to say, this year they're going to do this, next year they should do that, then 3 years from now they should be working on that. But kind of like this, laying it out, because what's going to happen is that evaluation report is going to hopefully go on with that student. If nothing else, it's going to be in their file at the current school. The parents will have a copy. And if they're wondering, why aren't you working on this, why aren't you working on this skill? They have that evaluation report that shows that. Now, I say it should go with them if they move on to another school, but unfortunately, that's not always the case. And I say evaluation report, and I know that some IEP systems in some districts don't require an actual report, like the current district I'm in right now. We don't have a separate report that we write. It goes right into the evaluation eligibility paperwork. We just write everything in there. So my section is usually pretty long because I want to have as much information in there as possible because I'm the only one that knows that information. So if I don't share it, nobody else is going to know it. And then the second place to write things is the present levels. It's really important to share your findings in the present levels. I don't know how many IEPs I've gotten where there is no information from previous testing in there. And I was in a district a couple of years ago where they don't have any of their evaluation information in their IEP system. Their IEP system is only IEPs. And I work from home and I work over Skype a lot, and I don't have physical access to the paperwork unless I'm on site. When I go to look in their IEP for the previous testing results, I can go, okay, well, let's see how they did on their self or on their told last year. And I go in there and I'm like, there is nothing in here. Well, this particular IEP program had no copy of their evaluation. So I couldn't find their evaluation. And sometimes I couldn't even find the physical copy of it because it was kept at like the district office, which was 50 miles away from where I worked. So it just was really difficult to get a copy of that. And it's really important then to copy that information into the present levels. So on the survey, there were a few responses that I loved that summarized why it's important to write the results in the present levels in addition to the evaluation. And one person wrote, I write a detailed present level. And they wrote PLEP. I write a detailed PLEP. The IEP is attached to the student, and so, in theory, it is the only guarantee in an otherwise chaotic special education system. It doesn't matter whether the student moves or if there is staff turnover. The IEP will remain, so it is worthwhile to cram that PLEP with enough information so that if the student landed on someone else's desk next year, next month, next week, they would have enough information to begin quality services immediately. And I cannot stress that enough because just because you think, oh, that kid's lived here forever, they're not moving. You never know. You know that student, the people in the school know that student, but if that student picked up and moved tomorrow and the only thing that went with them was the IEP, it needs to be in there because that next SLP needs to know what's going on with that student. The present levels, that section is there to paint a picture of that student. It's not to put in the minimum amount of information. So let's see here. Another response is another person said that they also include what level of support, or so what kind of models or support is needed to have that student be successful. Then capture what else may need to be addressed in the future. Some other people wrote things like they send an email to the specific teacher, like the resource room teacher, to let them know what the findings are. One person wrote that they discussed with the team or family where things could go in the future and what the next steps will be if it's a very complex or high-needs student. Another person said that they write things down in the progress notes. And that's fine, but I caution against just doing that because, again, what happens to the evaluation report is that kid moves, there's a new school, the IEP system doesn't have it, or, a situation like me where I work from home and I don't have access to the physical copy. And then also, like the one that says that they discuss with a team or family where things could go in the future for the complex or high needs students. The thing is, I imagine that the teachers and the parents are very overwhelmed in IEP meetings, especially if they're really complex kids, and talking about things that they need to work on in the future. That's just so much information to give them in a meeting. So write it down. Just write down whatever you can. Usually the IEP does follow that child. The parents often get very overwhelmed with information at IEP meetings. So don't rely on just verbal information and telling them what needs to happen in the future, because it's just too much. So write it down in the evaluation, write it down in the present levels. And then I was actually surprised that there are a few people that didn't write any of this sort of information in the present levels. And so hopefully they will now. And then the last step is writing SMART goals. Of course, we want to write goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, or realistic, relevant to that student, and that there's a time frame considered, like this is within a year, or in certain settings. So an example of a goal that is too general would be, Kelly will increase her receptive and expressive language skills. A more specific and hopefully better goal would be, Kelly will increase her receptive and expressive language skills, or let me restate that. Kelly will increase her receptive and expressive language skills by identifying and labeling classroom vocabulary, including 6 spatial concepts and 5 attributes. And then, of course, you go on to include, where they're currently at, and then, what percentage or what accuracy you hope to get by the end of the year. But that's all going to be dependent on the child. But again, making sure your goals are SMART. And if you Google SMART IEP goals, it's this whole acronym that they're using now. So specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and there's a time frame. So just to recap the steps, I'll go through those again. Step 1, do the evaluation, review the results, know what the subtests are measuring, look at patterns of errors, use the item analysis, do a language sample. Does it support your testing? Are there other concerns that pop up when you do your language sample? Next, prioritize. Consider the hierarchy of language development. Consider teacher, parent, or student input. What would they like to see happen with the student? Pick 2 or 3 things to target. And write, just because they missed it on the test doesn't need to be a goal. Write it down in the evaluation and the present levels. And then again, write SMART goals. So to the do nots. Do not write a goal for every item missed. Look for patterns of errors and prioritize. Do not write goals verbatim from a subtest or erred item. So do not write goals like Sierra will repeat sentences of increasing length and complexity, or John will formulate sentences. Do not write goals that are too general. It does need to include your language targets. And do not write goals that are too specific. So no program names or limiting therapy techniques. So those are my recommendations of connecting your assessment results to your IEP goals. And while this is not the only way to do it, this is what I found useful, and a lot of other people have found useful when going from an evaluation to IEP goals. So I hope that you all learned something today, and have a great week. Thanks.
Congrats! You just earned 30 minutes of CEUs approved by the Oregon State Board of Examiners. To document your participation, please visit www.thehellofoundationschools.com/CEU. You can also find the blog post for this and all of our episodes at www.thehellofoundationschools.com. This is the best way to get in touch with our guest with your questions and comments. And if you want updates about upcoming shows and opportunities to participate, check us out on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.